Alessandra Faggian från L'Aquila som ligger i Appenninerna. Professor Alessandra Faggian, welcome to the conference.
Thank you very much. Welcome thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you for being here today. You're a professor in applied economics and also Director of Social Science at the Gran Sasso Science Institute in L'Aquila in Italy. And you're going to talk to us about global trends for rural areas of the future.
Yeah.
And I also want to encourage our participants, please ask your questions in the chat, preferably in English. So Alessandra, if you are ready, you're free to begin.
I am. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I already thank you, but again, thank you for having me here today. Can you see my screen? Yes, no problem.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so what I'm going to talk to you today, it's a little bit this idea that there are opportunities for peripheral areas following the pandemic, COVID-19. So I'm an applied economist, but I specialize in regional economics especially. And in the last few years, since I came back from the US to Italy, to my country, I actually devoted my time to talk about why is it so important that we care about peripheral areas. And when the pandemic hit, a lot of journalists were actually contacting me to ask me, so are people moving to peripheral areas now? Are we going to observe an increase in mobility towards these peripheral areas? And my answer was, well, I wish, but I think that the problem is a little bit more complex than that. So here I have two pictures. The one on the right is actually Milan, the city where I was born. And on the left, you can see the Italian countryside. It's Tuscany, actually. Okay, so let's start with probably the conclusions, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Are there opportunities for peripheral areas following COVID-19? Yes, I can tell you that, yes, I believe that there are, because of a series of reasons. First of all, there's going to be a large amount of money put into the system. This is different from the previous crisis, because in the 2008 and 9 recession, we were actually going into austerity and trying to spend less. Now we're going to try and spend more to sustain the economy that has been hardly hit by this pandemic. The second thing is that as economists, we study the preferences of people, the choices of people. And I think that this pandemic has actually possibly changed for good some of our preferences, and especially regarding the periphery versus the core. Also, it made us aware of new possibilities. Talk about my country, Italy. Not very many people were working remotely before the pandemic, but now the amount of people that are working remotely went from 500,000 to over 8 million people. So obviously this opens up a series of possibilities that before we didn't have. Although I believe that there are opportunities for the periphery, there is a but. So we don't have to lower the attention to the peripheries, because nowadays I go to a lot of conferences when I talk about the problems of the cities. You know, New York is going to have a lot of issues, or Milan, or whatever. Yes, I can understand that the cities will have to rethink themselves as well, but I don't think the cities will die. I actually believe that we still have to keep the attention to the peripheries very high. And especially because the structural weaknesses of the peripheries did not disappear with COVID-19. So investment in the periphery is still necessary. And timing for the peripheries is also going to be very crucial, because there is the first mover advantage. So the peripheries that are going to capture this opportunity first, being more innovative than other places, will be the one that will really benefit from the possibilities of the pandemic. The reason why it's not so clear whether people will really move towards the periphery is that actually the pandemic, it's not only a centrifugal force, so one that pushes people away from the center, but also has some centripetal forces. Let me explain to you a little bit better. These are some of the most recurrent arguments that I read about in the newspapers, both in Italy but also abroad, in which you can see that there are both, as I said before, centrifugal and centripetal forces. So among the opportunities for the peripheries, which I highlighted in green, of course, we all know that density and agglomeration favor the spread of the contagion. So large cities, I'm thinking about Italy, right, where the pandemic in Europe started. As you know a little bit the geography of my country, the north is the most industrialized, the one with the denser and larger cities. And the pandemic struck especially the north, where there was all this density and agglomeration, large cities. The housing market, if people spend more time at home, they might prefer larger houses. And we are already observing this here in my country. They want more outdoor space, but they also want larger houses because they want an office in the house. This phenomenon of cocooning. So you stay in the house, hence you want a larger one, but you also want a garden, which, you know, some people didn't have in large cities. People are also rethinking the values of amenities, natural amenities. So thinking about more quality of life, well-being issues rather than just monetary issues. We also observed a lot of proximity tourism. So in Italy, instead of going large distances or going abroad, we prefer to actually stay closer even when we were going for touristic reasons. And so this proximity tourism is possible if you live in a nice place. So if you are close to the mountains, if you are close to the sea. And of course, the working from home opens up, as I said before, a whole series of possibilities, because if you commute less frequently, then longer commute becomes more acceptable. But there are also centripetal forces. I'm going to talk about the digital divide in a second, but peripheries are not equipped for teleworking. And it's not only the digital infrastructure, it's also what I call the digital human capital. People don't have the skills to use digital infrastructure sometimes. But also, in the most peripheral areas, sometimes you do lack essential services. So one thing that we observed in my country was that health and education were not adequate for COVID-19, for a shock. And so this is a big issue, because if people think that a pandemic is going to strike again, they might prefer to stay closer to where they have better schools and better hospitals, which is not in the peripheries. Also, and this is similar to the recession of 2008, peripheries are normally weaker economic systems. So when the economic crisis will strike, and actually we are in the midst of it right now, we will observe a widening in the gap between the peripheries and the cities, with the cities more or less bouncing back or being more able to do so, while the peripheries will actually have more companies maybe filing for bankruptcy, because they're normally also smaller in size than the large companies that are located in more central places. And the other side of the coin of the working from home phenomenon is that it might make also cities more appealing. For instance, we don't commute very much by bike in Italy, but following the pandemic, we started taking a little bit on the Dutch model. And now there is a lot of thinking about doing these cycleways, sustainable way of transport, also in the cities. If we do this, if we will apply this principle, then a lot of people might find attractive to live in cities as well, because the traffic might actually go down. The other side of this is that right now people are a little bit scared of using public transportation, so they rely on cars more, and so there is a little bit more traffic right now. So a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different arguments, and if you actually read different articles, both in newspaper or also in the policy debate or in academia, you'll see that all these aspects have been kind of studied already. But in all these mass of topics, we need to make a little bit of order. And being an economist, you have to divide things that are more on the demand side, so that relate to individual behavior, versus things that are more on the supply side, which relate more to local economies. And most of all, there are phenomena that are more short-term, so that we are experiencing now during the pandemic, and we will experience in the short term, right in the aftermath of the pandemic, and the long-term phenomena. Right now, the COVID-19 has been long enough that some things have changed for good. And so what is really important for us right now is understand what's going to happen in the long term. How are individual preferences going to change? And most of all, what structural challenges of the peripheries we do need to tackle now. So I'm going to focus on this kind of long-term perspective rather than the short-term, because we are not yet out of it, but we are kind of out of it. So we need to think ahead a little bit more. Okay, so the biggest change that it's needed, badly needed in the peripheries, it's digitalization. What COVID did was accelerate a process that was already there, which was this digitalization. And it made very clear the crucial role of digitalization for future development, right? So this process sped up, but it's still not enough. And there are still a lot of rural areas that are really lagging behind. And without this, they don't go anywhere. Digitalization is now a precondition for future development. It's necessary, not sufficient, because we still need to create jobs, but it's a necessary condition for that. And what I said before, very important, we need to have digital literacy courses, for instance, for older people that live in peripheries. This is Italy, so I just wanted to give you an idea. The darker areas are areas where they don't have enough internet. And so on the right, you only have the inner areas, the peripheral areas of Italy. As you can see, the darker areas in Italy are exactly overlapping with the peripheral areas. There are over 6 million families in Italy that are without internet, and the majority of these families are in peripheral areas. So we do need to speed up with that. A good example of digitalization and kind of, smart development or peripheral areas in Italy is in Tuscany, well, I guess you all know the region is very famous. This village that I show you in the picture was very fast in digitalizing itself, getting this ultra fast broadband. And now it's using this place branding, calling itself the first smart working village of Italy. And also offers monetary incentive to people moving there. So if they live there at least 2 months, they get 50% of the rent off. So it's very cheap to live there. And they are actually place branding this place, trying to catch these opportunities of the COVID-19, being the first ones with the innovative idea exploiting the digitalization process of peripheral areas. But also, there are changes in preferences. So right now, people are not only forced to work from home, they want to work from home. As I said, in Italy, we went from 500,000 to 8 million, and a lot of people are actually thinking of not going back to normal, not going back to face-to-face contact every day. This is another example in the UK. They've done this survey, and what they found is that before the pandemic, about 42% of people have never worked from home, right? And 37 were less than once a week working from home. They asked them what they were planning to do in the next couple of years. And as you can tell, the majority of them were still planning to work from home. So this is really becoming a big pool of potential for the areas that are not so central. The same goes for studying. I work at the university, and right now we are teaching online. So a lot of students that are outside their region for studying, they are back home and they do it online. So that also creates some new possibilities for us. On the housing, again, there has been an acceleration of some of the trends of preference that already were evident before the pandemic. This is, again, a survey that was done in the UK. And the most appealing housing features now became to have a personal outdoor space, so a garden, as I said before, but also having private workspace in the house. So again, something that goes into the direction of pushing people outside the core. Okay, so I know I only have 15 minutes, so I'm at 13 minutes, so I have 2 minutes to actually kind of give you my take-home message. Of course, that there has been so much debate, and this is just a short presentation to give you some food for thoughts, but a lot of has been said about COVID-19. And so my take-home message goes like this. The first thing is that there is really too much about COVID over there, out there right now. So everybody's studying and talking about COVID-19. When I was preparing different speeches, I could find almost anything. And there's been this COVIDization of the debate, which now it's a little bit maybe too much. This is something really unprecedented, because it's different from the 2009 financial crisis, because it implied some fundamental behavioral changes this time. Preferences of people have changed, and there are new scenarios. So as an economist now, for me, it's really important to also talk with psychologists to try and understand what's going to happen in the mind of people and in their choices in the future. I don't think we're going back to normal. Up until a few months ago, I was hearing people saying, oh, you know, we're going to have the vaccine, we're going back to normal. I don't think so. Things have changed for good. Also because people realize that there have been other instances in which we run the risk of a pandemic. So it's becoming a kind of recurrent thing. Now that it happened once, what is going to tell us that it's not going to happen again? So people are going to adapt to that. There's still a lot of uncertainty. We are still in the midst of it. So having clear answer, it's still a little bit too early, but what I really want to push people to do, it's important to avoid simplistic answers. Everybody moving to the peripheries. The peripheries are gonna reborn. I don't think so. There are changes in both directions. The cities will not die. I'm pretty sure that they have a very strong capacity of bounce back. They are very resilient, but there is some, they will have to adapt some. For instance, you know, thinking about modes of transportation, which are more sustainable, and the different patterns of commuting that they are going to observe. And, but most of all, there are real opportunities for peripheral areas, even though, you know, some areas will be able to grab them immediately, some will still lag behind, and there might be inequalities also that increase between these places. But still very, very important to continue with place-sensitive policies, not forget about the structural problems and weaknesses of the peripheral areas if we really want them to grab this opportunity provided by COVID. Thank you very much.
Mille grazie, Alessandra Faggian.
Tack.
So thank you so much for giving us the Italian perspective and giving us food for thoughts for the continuing discussions. So we have time for a few questions. So let's start with how can we grab these opportunities so that we don't fall back to our old ways that was before the pandemic?
Well, I gave you an example, for instance, in this village in Tuscany. I think that the key is to have an innovative idea and being first. And this place branding is really important. It seems silly, but if you do have the necessary infrastructure, like in this case, the broadband, and you find a label that goes with your place and you are the first one, then, you know, you can observe certain results in that. The second thing is they are also giving incentive these places. So in the short term, it's not a long-term solution, but in the short term, even if you manage to attract, you know, few people in small villages can really make a difference. And I see another question on the young migrants. This is what these places are trying to do. So it's the young migrants that move to the city. But also a lot of these young migrants now, at least in Italy, have started being a little bit fed up of this, and they want to go back to a quality of life which is higher. And some of them are well educated and they have an entrepreneurial spirit. These are the people that you want to get back, the ones that can create themselves new jobs for other people. And really, in some of the Italian places that are really small, all you need is really not a large amount of people. So if you manage to get a critical mass, then maybe think and, you know, move on.
Okay, so I think that's all we have time for, Alessandra. So thank you again so much. And if you have time, you can have a look in the chat because there are more questions for you, and maybe you can answer the questions in the chat.
I will. Thank you very much. Thank you
so much.